G'day. Thanks for the welcome, and just acknowledge we're on Quandamooka mob land that we're meeting on today, and also recognise my colleagues, the Quandamooka people, who I have a privilege of working with. My background is as an environmental specialist for kayak. I've worked with Redland City Council, and then I worked with Sibelco, the mining company. Did mine closure rehabilitation there, and then Kayak asked me to come over and work with them as an environmental scientist and environmental specialist. So today I'm really keen to focus about some work that we've just done 2 weeks ago in terms of some burning that we did on 18 Mile Swamp. I'll touch on some of the other ecological and scientific work that we've been doing. So Kayak's vision is the Quandamooka people caring for country in a viable economy using traditional and modern knowledge. And I guess that's the emphasis of today, is using that traditional and modern knowledge to build that and heal country, heal people. The knowledge of country lives in them, within the Quandamooka people and in the country. The elders help learn and connect with Quandamooka knowledge, tradition and modern knowledge. So I've had the privilege to work with Quandamooka's elders and the up-and-coming rangers in relation to building their understanding and using their knowledge that's been built over thousands of years. 18 Mile Swamp is highly culturally significant for the Quandamooka and high ecological value location of the swamp, fire orchids, as well as rainforest and a range of other ecosystems along there in an open heathland, swampy country. It's fed by groundwater. There's also some surface water. It's been impacted since colonisation by mining, roads and water extraction. Historically dominated by sedges through the middle of the swamp and on the edges with melaleuca. It's koala habitat and got rainforest patches and these little land bridges, which is also culturally significant locations and cultural sites are throughout. And that very southern end of that swamp area, there's old camp areas where the Quandamooka people were excluded a lot and not able to get there until native title, and we could work through with the mining company to get access through those areas. So researchers and Quandamooka people were keen to understand. We've worked with a range of universities to build our knowledge and understanding of the swamp. Through core sampling, we've been able to understand the age, growth and formation of the swamp and vegetation changes over time. So the grey shaded area there is the swamp itself, and that's a sort of a cross section of the island in relation to the western side and the eastern side, and 18 Mile Swamp is this key value there, and down below is that groundwater table. The cross sections is able to give us a bit of a picture of what the swamps and how it's made up of. So there's the beach sediments that have formed over thousands of years, and then the tidal creek system, and then the peat system coming across it and through that environment. For those who don't know, that the beach on North Stradbroke Island or Minjerribah was mined. They went up along the coastline and went through right across up through to the end, and then they went inland to mine. So in 1993, it was suggested the wetland development around 2,400 years ago, predominantly freshwater evidence of estuary, south for the most part around 500 years. Fully freshwater ecosystem. And they've used a range of dating techniques. So this recent study is throwing some more clarity in relation to how old it is and the values of the site. It is a highly dynamic and complex system. It doesn't appear to be a prograding system, so it wasn't north to south. There's actually age groups in between the swamp and through that habitat. Freshwater is a key input into the player, and it looks like the freshwater from Cabora, which is Blue Lake, which is a very sacred site for the Quandamooka people, has had significant impact in the development of that area. The peatland is highly dynamic and is exposing, developing, closing, may reflect via variable change rates in terms of groundwater flow. It's clear through the impacts of the work that there's been a marked increase in sheoak, And there's a lot of cessation of Quandamooka's cultural burning practices around 200 odd years ago when colonisation came to the island. There's been associated decline in tree species, cypress, Banksian eucalypt, paperbark and myrtaceae shrubs. And more recent, since looking at since colonisation, you're looking at over the last 50 to 100 years, more wildfire events and larger charcoal deposition throughout the scales. We're also seeing a lot of that anthropogenic activities in terms of non-native species starting to colonise in around the edges and through the area of the swamp. They did this through looking at the pollen and understanding the species and what was that. I won't get into the details of the scientific study. It's really just to give you a highlight of blending the science and the cultural knowledge. So recent fire history, in 2018, a lightning strike, over 70% of the island burnt. In 2014, lightning strike occurred also. We endeavoured to hold it up at a Herring Lagoon Trench, which is a man-made structure created by the mining companies and for the extraction of water by SEQ water. The data below shows those vegetation changes over time, looking at those pollen records. But also if you look over to the charcoal concentration, you see that are larger depositions in that since the last 200 years and larger quantities of it and deposition of that, which matches Quandamooka's knowledge and understanding of the site and the history of being excluded from actually undertaking their burning practices they had in the past. So again, some further macro charcoal and looking at the iron levels, zincs. We're keen to work with scientists to understand the impacts of mining in relation to that titanium, iron, titanium concentrations that are now impacting through the water system. So, Quandamooka people's wishes and desires are return low intensity frequent burns to the swamp, reduce the melaleuca density through the swamp. So Quandamooka people have observed the melaleuca density get increased further ever since the water extraction from the island in the 90s, in the 80s and 90s by Redland City Council and now by SEQ Water. So if you live in the Redlands, you're actually drinking a lot of the water from North Stradbroke Island. It's a low-cost water supply. All they have to do is add lime to it to neutralise the pH of the water. There's very little other contamination because there's a big sand filter. It's also important in relation to protecting the cultural ecological sites. The wildfires events of the last, since colonisation, has been significant impacts on traditional camps and ceremonial grounds in that southern end of the island. So this is the first time since colonisation that a planned burn or a Quandamooka people have actually been able to light the swamp. It's been 5 years in the making. Unfortunately, with legislation and issues, there's always that concern of the person that lights the fire, whether it gets away, and the risk in relation to doing that. So a lot of planning, a lot of work. We identified the key values, koala, rainforest areas, birds of prey, as well as the ecological significance. The bigger map is actually the map planning that we did in relation to undertaking the burn. So we burnt the high country first, down onto the swamp. Once it got into the swamp, we then put fire into the swamp to move that way. So we also do drone work. Thanks to WWF and other programs, we've been able to get our own thermal drone operations. We've worked with the Rural Fire Brigade also to look at the koalas and understand that population. So there's a young joey climbing on the mum's back. That's actually in Melaleuca in around the swamp areas. So the prime koala habitat on the island is really narrow bands of open eucalypt or robusta habitat. And a bit of down that bottom end of the swamp, it's scribbly gum. Hang on, kid. We're also doing the thermal camera work. Got to observe those other species, which the previous presenters talked about. And that's the same reaction I get every time I show that video. So a lot of planning went into the ignition strategy, resources, 2 helicopter, 2 water bombers. We had an incendiary drone operations. We've had staff from QPWS, Rural Fire Service, SEQ Water, Queensland Fire and Rescue. It was a 24-hour operation. The proudest moment was actually having each of the sector commanders being Quandamooka people. So it's really important the Quandamooka people are on country doing the burns and leading the way in relation to those organisations. Excuse my emotion. Too many years working with Quandamooka people to finally see it happen and to see post-colonisation the first time this swamp burnt. So given the risk of the area, we use helicopters to water bomb areas first. So this helicopter's picked up water and is dumping up to the top end of that, so the most eastern side of the swamp, putting water through there to help reduce it spreading into the stage 2. Our backup plan was to burn stage 2 and move on if we had to. But we also wanted to prove that during wildfire events, that man-made structure of that canal could be utilised in the future if we had the right technology and the right information and the right grounds to actually be able to contain it within those areas, therefore protecting those systems. So what we did was we actually used a drone doing incendiary drops. Each of those green dots and blue dots and red dots were the first lot of series of incendiary drops that we did and conducted. Our objective was to contain the fire from that swamp or that trench to the north. So that's a shot of the first 2 lots using the thermal. You see the effectiveness of letting that trench do its work, plus also that water bombing. I'm pretty sure we were dropping the incendiaries around 5 metres apart. So you can see the trench. So the trench was there. That was originally a cableway area for the mining. So when they were mining off the beach, the big cableway actually went across there and took the mineral back up to Dunwich or Gympie. Just where the sedges are there in that area, that's where a little bit of fire did start to spread across. We helicopter dropped that later on and we were able to contain it, everything to the north. The contractors had 2 drones operating. They had a M300 and then their bigger M30, I think, which is what the incendiary drops. So we showed effectively that worked really well in terms of burning off that edge and letting it across that environment and protecting that site. Here just shows you the 5 metre intervals in relation to those drops and what it was like from burning out from those incendiary circles. And then once hitting the water, it just repeated itself out. Quandamooka people are keen to kill those melaleucas, given the history and their understanding of those sites and the invasion of those species into that swamp. We're working with scientists and other workers to understand those impacts and whether SEQ water have some responsibility as well as the mining in relation to those use of that water. Here's the thermal, shows really well those drops and how it works and along those edges, and that it worked off and joined through there. So those who do planned burning and prescribed burning, this is really good technique in relation to spot burns. Gone are the days of doing lines and doing that and trying to manage the fire more slowly. Here's a bit further on in relation to taking that fire back. We're getting good spatial movement away from the edge. We lit up this on the Thursday. We were planning to do this on the Friday. The Wednesday night fire creeped down a couple off the terrestrial and started to burn the swamp to the north. Westerly wind was taking the smoke directly out over the ocean. So this shot, we'll start to see the actual drone operation working. Up in the back screen there, you might see what looks like a little bird just above that track area. That's the drone operating. Can I pick it up again? It zooms in shortly. You see it? Just there. So it's making its way out and then it's dropping the fire back the other way. and heading back towards where myself and one of our Quandamooka men was, as well as the contractors working with us. Kayak is keen to utilise technology and information in relation to delivering on-ground works. Because the changes on the island, because of mining, because of the human interactions and those impacts, the vegetation and the ecology has changed so much that the ability to actually undertake cultural burning as it was done historically is almost impossible. And because of the risk of liability and legalities, given the size of the island and the risk of wildfire events going into those townships, Quandamooka is recognising the need to work with modern science, modern technology to deliver the outcomes that they're wanting. So a colleague of mine, Darren Burns, he looks forward to the day when the vegetation's back to what it was, which is open grassland, open understory habitat, less of the shrubby, less of the wildfire tolerant species that have adapted to the European burning regimes and shifted back into that direction. It's at that point when those cultural burning practices probably can be returned. You can see the little incendiaries dropping. It is here with glycol mixed with a chemical, and then an incendiary works has worked. So that's the burn afterwards. We've been really pleased with that. There's still patchiness in relation to the habitat that's left. That's the edge of that swamp area through there. We had a little bit of fire creep in just off this edge. The helicopter was able to put that out before it went across since we impacted the stage 2 area. So burning here, I don't actually total area, I think it was 600 odd hectares. It's a large, vast area along that swamp area. The Quandamooka people and national parks and everybody are really pleased with the outcomes of the burn, the extent of burn and the patchiness that it was able to deliver. It shows timing of burning on these islands in relation to then the groundwater tables up when good rain's been had, plus then the right wind direction in relation to burning. This is quite achievable and quite ability to deliver. It's not cheap given helicopters and the resources required, but this is a far cheaper option than trying to tackle fire after a wildfire event. Drone operator was also able to give us that map. We did that in relation to trying to look at whether we could look at operationally sending crews in there to start attacking the Melaleuca along that edge and make that trench useful in relation to potential fire trail or a fire suppression line into the future. Our works was the contractors that we did, QPWS, Rural Fire Service, Queensland Fire Department, SEQ Water, and that's the range of the teams. Dominated by Quandamooka people in all departments in relation to delivering that burn in a successful outcome. In summary, Kayak's blending science with cultural knowledge to support the implementation of its strategic objective of healing Quandamooka Country. We do have other examples where we're using technology. So pest management, we're using a lot of wildlife camera work. We've had a success in reducing the fox population. We're now starting to see a couple of rogue foxes out there. We're also picking up some deer that have swum across and starting to move through the island. Weed management, we're using GIS and other information. We have our own Esri GIS mapping system where we're collecting and collating data and reporting back in relation to delivery of the on-ground works by our Quandamooka rangers. Groundwater is a key outcome for Quandamooka people. We're working with the state government and we actually developed a Quandamooka cultural values groundwater model. This will be used for Quandamooka people to understand the impacts of water extraction on the island, plus also potential for Quandamooka people to use the water as a resource for themselves, either for their own supply in terms of their people, or potentially as another commercial business. Native title has not brought financial riches to the Quandamooka people. Native title still restricts the ability for Quandamooka people to utilise any of those cultural resources for commercial purposes. It's something that people need to understand when native title is provided. It just gives them recognition that they are the holders of those land and they always have and always will be. Quampi management, that's a marine quampi. We're looking at a harvest strategy, working with scientists to understand the protection of the quampi. Quampi is a traditional food resource for the Quandamooka people. It's collected from the foreshores. Because of sedimentation, because of other factors, the population's decreasing. We're trying to work with the Quandamooka people to set up their own harvest process and monitoring through our own ranger teams. Kayak has 40 or 50 rangers, funded both by state and federal funding. A month ago, our first female ranger team has been created and established and doing on-country work in relation to delivery of this work. So it's a great pleasure that I get the chance to work with them and share their knowledge and blend the science knowledge and working with other universities. That's my speech. Thank you.
Thanks, Dan. We do have a couple of questions online. So is the freshwater drawn sourced for natural lakes or groundwater, and is the water distributed to Redlands Shire via SEQ Water's Northern Interconnector pipeline?
So yes, the water coming from the island is taken from bores as well as a surface flow in 18-mile swamp. It's moved across to the mainland and is then used to feed the Redlands City Council area. That tank on that northern side is also connected to the rest of BCC. There was a promise at the time of connecting that water from North Stradbroke Island would only be feeding through to the Redlands, but we don't have any guarantee of that.
Thank you. And one other question from Nicole online. For pest management, are you using the cameras to identify where the pest species are to then go in the usual management strategies?
Yeah, so the pest management, and we're using Evorder as the AI program behind the scenes. That's given us a good picture of where the populations of foxes and cats are. We're desperately working our way to get the resourcing to have one of our Quandamooka guys drive the feral cat eradication program on the island. Foxes, we've done more baiting. Baiting's been very successful. To remove these final few, we're going to have to target it more selectively in terms of where they're colonising and where they're going. Baiting, you have a limitation of where you can around the townships, which is where we're thinking the foxes are coming out from. So there's a 2-kilometre buffer for the risk of baiting and impacting domestic dogs. Quandamooka people who are living on country also have dogs, so that's also limiting our ability to utilise that. We'll be looking at using the drone thermal technology for shooting and other forms in relation to controlling those species.
Thank you, Dan.